Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and what I want to talk to you about today is Fletcher Hanks and his most famous comic book creation, Fantomah. Now, Fantomah, Mystery Woman of the Jungle, was created in 1940. She's widely celebrated as the first female superhero. Now, the proper term would be superheroine, but that sounds a little bit too much like an amped up drug to me, so we're going to stick with female superhero. There have been superheroes in comics before Fantomah, but none of them were both superpowered and a hero. Just as Superman wasn't the first hero in comics, he was the first superhero, as in both superpowered and heroic. She first appeared in Jungle Comics issue number 2 on the 10th of February, 1940. She was the last backup story in the 80-plus page comic, which mainly featured Kanga, the Jungle Lord, whose story and origin matches those of Tarzan almost perfectly. Fantomah was a beautiful blonde woman who walked the jungle in a slip or a negligee. Which jungle? It's never said. But it's either a huge jungle or several different jungles, maybe all of the jungles throughout all of the world, because each story is resolved in and of itself. Whatever giant mystery region or fantastic castle exists in this jungle, it's a 5-page story that we never hear from these characters or this particular civilization ever again. Fantomah is the creation of Fletcher Hanks under the pseudonym of Barclay Flagg. As I've mentioned in previous videos, pseudonyms were the norm of this early stage of comic book development. Very few people ever used their real names. Do you think Stan Lee goes by his birth name? He produced work for at least 4 different companies and used many pseudonyms so that he could moonlight. Moonlighting is a term used by old people that basically means working a second job. It was always frowned upon by your primary job to have a second job. They didn't care about money or this, that, or the other thing. It was about loyalty and the idea that you'd probably be too tired to be able to work your main job if you moonlighted at a second job, a night job. Fletcher was inspired to enter the comic book world, as so many others were, after the introduction of Superman in Action Comics #1. Fletcher himself created Stardust, the Super Wizard, and Space Smith for Fox Features Syndicate, Mow 'Em Down, the Boxer for Great Comics, Big Red McLean for Flight Comics, and several others. While he worked for Will Eisner and Bob Iger, who are some of the most respected of the Golden Age comic producers, many of these other comic book companies were sweatshop-style factory work, as illustrated by Jack Kirby. See my 4-part playlist on Jack for more details on the early working conditions of comic book artists. Fletcher was more than just the artist, however. He was the penciler, inker, the letterer, and the writer. He did everything himself. The most famous of his creations, however, was Fantomah. He was hired by the Fiction House Company to draw for their latest venture, Jungle Comics, which was an African-themed comic where white people would go to various parts of Africa and be the protagonists and antagonists, while tribal people were just background characters. Fletcher made several contributions to this comic line, including Taboo, Wizard of the Jungle. But his most lasting contribution of them all would be Fantomah, Mystery Woman of the Jungle. Fantomah would be a dungeon master-like character who would be in the background, watching over the jungle, as in her first story in Jungle Comics #2, where, omnisciently, she oversaw the moment of an elephant, the most beloved elephant of a particular kingdom, realized that it was about his time to die, and he started making his way toward the mysterious elephant graveyard, the whereabouts of which no mortal knew. 2 greedy criminals were following the elephant, hoping to steal the bejeweled blanket of the beast, and the ivory tusks of all the other elephants they would find following this one. Fantomah would witness all of this, and, appearing as a disembodied skull with her long blonde hair, would warn the evildoers that this is a punishable crime, and that they would receive a jungle death if they did not turn back from their current course. This was a common theme of all of Fletcher's comics, and the criminals, whatever their dastardly plan, would never listen, whereby Fantomah would use her godlike powers to meet whatever justice she deemed fit. In the case of the elephant graveyard robbers, she filled them with great greed, causing one to stab the other in the back, while he himself would be engulfed in quicksand. All of these comics, by the way, are so old that they're in the public domain now. So not only can I actually reproduce them completely on the video or anyplace else, you yourself can actually reproduce them as well. And anybody has free license to draw or write a Fantomah comic. It's not a big deal anymore. It's completely legal. In another story, the evildoers would be turned into distinctive lizard-like creatures and returned to their home country as a warning to all others to never return with evil intentions. Fantomah didn't have a specific power set like so many heroes. She was of deity proportions of power, and she was able to do whatever the story called for, including flight, invisibility, changing living and non-living creatures into something else entirely, and clairvoyance over her entire jungle, or anywhere in the world if they had the intention of coming to the jungle to do harm. The most distinguishing feature of Fantomah, however, was that she would change her face into a skull, and her skin blue whenever she was angry. In fact, most of his characters were like this, powerful deity-like characters who would not stop a criminal so much as warn and then punish a criminal in and by all sorts of extraordinary measures. Fletcher was the complete creator of Fantomah from issue number 2 of Jungle Comics, where he included a Fantomah story in every issue up until number 15, when he decided to leave the comics industry. In all, Fletcher worked in the comics industry from 1939 to 1941, where he walked away and never looked back. From issue number 16 on, there would be several other artists and writers who would contribute and make Fantomah comics, all the way up until the series' end. But at the end of the day, they kept succeedingly getting worse and worse, in the sense that they weren't quite the same as Fletcher would make them. Very little is known about Fletcher besides that, and what little we do know comes from one of his 4 children, Fletcher Hanks Jr. Fletcher Jr. never revealed why his father left the comics industry, but that he did go on to paint murals for wealthy customers. However, he would spend the money on alcohol for himself and his friends. According to Fletcher Jr., his father was a drunk, and he was abusive to everyone in the household. Jr., the second oldest of the children, worked several odd jobs in order to support the family. One day in 1930, his father would just disappear, never to be seen again. He had stolen all the money Jr. had earned and saved. Jr.'s mother said, "It's a small price to pay to be rid of the bum." According to multiple conflicting sources, Fletcher Sr. himself was born on December 1st of either 1989 or 1987, depending on who you listen to. But either way, he was born in Paterson, New Jersey, to William Hanks, a Methodist minister, and Alice Fletcher Hanks, who was the daughter of English immigrants. They soon moved to Oxford, Maryland, which is where Fletcher grew up. He would later marry Margaret in 1912 and have 4 children, William, Fletcher Jr., Alma, and Douglas. According to his estranged wife, Fletcher Sr.'s mother was overindulgent and doted on her son way too much, commenting on how his mother even paid for his art school back in 1910 when he was around 21 or 23 years old, shortly before they got married. Back in those days, it was common practice that a child who wanted further education would put himself through school. He attended this school through correspondence, and the school itself was W. L. Evans' cartooning course, which still exists to this day. Will Eisner, a comic book legend by any standard, recalled that Fletcher Hanks was a punctual cartoonist who would always do all the work himself on his comics. He was an adult, working in a business of mostly teenagers. Again, while we don't know the exact reason why Fletcher quit the comic industry after only 3 years in the field, I personally speculate that it was because he was an adult working in the teenage-driven industry at the time. Again, if you look at my Jack Kirby videos, you'll see that it was more of a sweatshop mentality, and he was a big-time creative freedom sort of person who just didn't want to be bound. And let's face it, again, in the Jack Kirby series, I explained how Fox Syndicate Publishing was one of the worst sweatshop-type conditions you could ever work for. It was more of a factory than an actual comic creation. In fact, several bankruptcies later, Fox Syndicate Publications would be considered one of the most embarrassing comic book companies ever. We know only 2 more definitive facts about Fletcher after his departure from comic books in 1941. 1. He became president of his town commission in Oxford, Maryland, from 1958 to 1960. The second is that he was found on a park bench in Manhattan in 1976. His body was frozen and he had no money on him. He was likely drunk, completely penniless, and destitute. His legacy in comics is one that has been compared to Ed Wood of Hollywood fame, in that he did everything himself, was brash and listened to no one, and he desired a creative freedom that would lead to impossibly strange stories that most people at the time could not grasp. Still, despite all the pros and cons, Fletcher does have the distinct honor of having created what is considered to be the very first female superhero ever, nearly 2 years before the advent of Wonder Woman. Guys, at the time that I'm making this video, I'm also doing a review of Pathfinder issue number 2, where you'll get to see an actual return of Fantomah. She's, again, in the public domain, so anybody can do stories about her. It's not a big deal. So, you know, fan fiction, anything that you want, by all means. She's also appeared an awful lot in the Hack and Slash and the later retitled Hack Slash comics. She's a character that anybody can write about, and again, very legacy to story. So, you know, there's that. And that concludes another class of Comic Book University, which, again, you can attend tuition free simply by subscribing. Guys, this is Professor Bill. Class dismissed.